plundered by nations
have taken another hit.
Ongoing trade war with the U.S.
Global ratings downgraded.
President Trump touting progress on tariffs.
Trade deals with other countries are coming.
Economic surrender.
What if I told you that Donald Trump's global tariff policy, the one that messed with billions in trade, was literally based on a calculator and very basic high school math?
It's so simple that it seemed improbable that they would have done it this way. I think initially my reaction was just like, no way. And then it was like, oh yes, way, of course.
I'm serious. No research, no economic models, just divide two numbers, slap it on a chart, and call it a tariff. You've got to hear how wild this is. This is how Trump's team calculated these global tariffs. He literally divided two numbers on a calculator.
The way they calculated this just simply doesn't make any sense.
I'm surprised that they actually had a formula. It seemed like the tariffs were sort of random and plucked from air, and it wasn't clear what criteria one was going to use.
And no, it's not a joke. Literally, no exaggeration. That is what actually happened. So get this. Trump's team rolled out a massive global tariff policy. Basically, a big, flashy board full of numbers showing how much every country on Earth was supposedly charging the US in tariffs. And when we say every country, we're talking like 180 of them. Pretty well, almost all of them.
For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating.
This was their big Liberation Day moment. Basically, tariff justice.
Very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing.
They brought out a giant chart, like it was a game show reveal, except the whole thing was complete nonsense. Now, you'd think something this big, like impacting billions of dollars in global trade, would involve detailed analysis. Maybe some complex economic models, trade law, international negotiation. I mean, something. But nope. They just took the trade deficit the US had with each country, divided it by the total amount of stuff America imported from that country, and voila, that percentage became the tariff they claimed each country was charging the US. Yep, you heard that right. They weren't even looking at actual tariffs or real trade barriers or currency manipulation. Nothing. Just a quick bit of high school math and boom, policies were made. Let me show you how ridiculous that is. Take China, for instance. In 1 year, the US had a trade deficit with China of $295.4 billion. That just means China sold way more stuff to the US than the US sold to China. Now, the US also imported approximately $438.9 billion worth of goods from China that same year. So divide the deficit by the imports, just take the calculator out. So 295.4 divided by 438.9, and that's 67.3. And magically, that's what they slapped on the chart as China's tariff on US goods.
The fact that we know now that it was a simple division of two numbers is perhaps a bit embarrassing to the administration.
It's like saying your grocery store is ripping you off because you buy stuff from them, but they don't buy anything from you. Imagine storming into Costco like, hey, I'm imposing a 20% tariff on your bananas because you didn't buy my leftovers last week. That's the logic in simple terms.
Just to use an analogy, we as households, we as consumers, we have trade surpluses and trade deficits with different entities in the economy. Most of us run a massive trade deficit with our grocery store. Most of us have a massive trade surplus with our employer. They pay us, but we don't buy anything from them. Are these things that are problems that we need to remedy? So in some sense, the underlying premise that bilateral trade imbalances are necessarily bad is just wrong.
Listen, I get it. Trump hates trade deficits. He sees them as the US getting ripped off. He thinks if a country sells more to you than you sell to them, then clearly they're ripping you off. But that's just not how trade works, like at all. Let's use real world analogy here for 1 second. We all have trade deficits and surpluses in our own lives. We've all got a trade surplus with our employer and they give us money, but we don't exactly buy goods from them. And we've all got a trade deficit with the local grocery store, for instance. They sell to us, we don't sell back. That's not a crisis. This just normal economic life works. So Trump's entire premise is broken from the start. But it honestly gets worse. Once this chart dropped, some trade experts actually looked into how these numbers were calculated. And they were just absolutely stunned. Not because it was complicated, but because it was so insanely simplistic that they didn't even believe it at first. One expert literally said, "I'm surprised they even had a formula." That's how random it all seemed. But here's where it really gets out of hand. Not only were these numbers completely made up, Trump's team actually used them to push real-world tariffs, like billions in import taxes based on absolutely nothing. I mean, saying it's just dumb is almost being too kind. But not only that, it's also dangerous. You've got to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Later on, the Trump White House actually released this supposedly advanced formula to explain how they calculated these so-called effective tariff rates. It had letters and symbols and it looked very technical, like something out of a grade 12 math class. But if you actually break it down, it amounts to exactly the same thing, just dividing the trade deficit by the total imports. They just wrapped it in extra fluff to make it look like what they did was smarter. Furthermore, they included adjustments for how sensitive customers are to price changes and how likely prices are to rise. Sounds super sophisticated, right? Yeah, just to set those values at 4 and then a quarter. Multiply them together and then you get 1. A nice round 1. And as we all know, multiplying anything by 1 changes absolutely nothing. So that whole part, just purely decorative nonsense.
It doesn't even attempt to measure what those tariffs are. They're not measuring other countries' tariffs. It's not measuring other countries' non-tariff measures. It's not even measuring currency manipulation. It's just taking the trade deficit as an ipso facto reflection of those things.
So the bottom line here is they cooked up this fancy sounding equation, threw in some extra steps to make it look impressive, but at the end of the day, they were just still dividing one number by another and calling it a tariff. And that would already be bad enough, right? Like, misleading people with fake data is a problem on its own. But what really takes this from dumb to dangerous is that these fake numbers were used to create real policy, like actual import taxes on actual products from actual companies all over the world.
You're going to have a lot of people out there believing something that's not true, namely that Vietnam has a tariff rate of 90% on US exports and Cambodia has a tariff rate of 97%. So that's just bad, right? It just gives people a false view of the world.
We're not talking about a blog post here. These were tariffs that would impact billions in trade, mess with supply chains, and force global companies into chaos. And they were based on math that wouldn't pass a 10th grade math test. One trade economist put it like this: it's not measuring other countries' tariffs. It's not measuring non-tariff barriers. It's not even measuring currency manipulation. It's just taking the trade deficit and saying, this is how unfair they are to us. That's it. And because this administration painted those numbers as actual tariffs, not estimates, but real rates, you had Americans believing Vietnam was charging a 90% tariff on US exports and Cambodia 97%. Like, what? That's just made up stuff, literally, and completely made up.
Because we are being very kind. We're kind people. We will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us.
The idea behind them was that Trump could use the tariffs we're imposing and say, oh, you're imposing a 90% tariff, but we're going to impose a 45% tariff, so let's negotiate your tariffs down. But when the 90% number is fake, then what do you do? Like, how do you negotiate it down? If you're Cambodia or Vietnam, how do you know how far to bring it down? And what are you even bringing down? Because the core problem isn't the trade barriers you have in place. The core problem is you're not buying enough stuff from the United States, and we're buying too much stuff, in Trump's mind, from you.
Now imagine being a trade negotiator from one of those countries. The US shows up and says, hey, we're charging you a 45% reciprocal tariff because you've been hitting us with a 90% one. And you're standing there like, no, we haven't. Where are you getting that number from? And their answer is, oh, it's just your trade deficit divided by the imports. What are you even supposed to say to that? It's like negotiating with a toddler who's made up their own board game rules halfway through. So good luck making sense of it. Here's another wild part. There are over 100 countries on that list where the US actually has a trade surplus, meaning those countries buy more from the US than they sell. But guess what number Trump's team assigned to all of them? Just 10%. A flat 10% tariff rate for all of them. Even though, by Trump's own logic, they're the ones being ripped off. Doesn't matter. Everyone gets a 10% tariff anyway. Why? I mean, nobody really knows. Maybe because it's a nice round number? Now look, Trump fans will say, well, he's just trying to level the playing field. He's doing this for American jobs. He's bringing back manufacturing. And sure, that's the sales pitch. But what are we really doing here? Using completely fake numbers to justify real economic pain? And what about regular people? That's not leveling the field. And Trump openly admits this. He says the tariffs are his favorite weapon in trade. He said the word tariff is beautiful. Like, that's a direct quote. The most beautiful word in the English language.
The word tariff to me is the most beautiful word in the entire dictionary, okay?
You know what's not beautiful? A global supply chain meltdown because you slapped a 45% tax on your trading partner over a made-up number.
We may have short-term some little pain, and people understand that.
We've already seen it happen. Just the threat of tariffs under Trump erased trillions from the stock market. Businesses couldn't plan their inventories, their prices, or their hiring because they had no idea what random number was going to pop up next. And if you think this is all just some weird, outdated policy that didn't really go anywhere, think again. Tariff rhetoric is still very much alive and well. So here's the thing. Trade deficits aren't automatically bad. They're not some big red flag of failure. They're just a part of how global economies work. We run trade deficits with lots of countries and trade surpluses with others. That is normal. But when you take those numbers, twist them into fake tariff rates, and then use those fake rates to build real policy that affects millions of regular people from both small and large businesses, that is just being reckless. And yeah, maybe it's tempting to believe that this kind of simple math makes it all easier to understand, but we all know that oversimplifying something so complex doesn't make it true. It just makes it misleading. Like trying to explain brain surgery with like Play-Doh or something so stupid like that. So when you hear Trump or anyone talking about reciprocal tariffs and throwing out big scary numbers like China's charging us 67%, just remember, they're not telling you the truth. They're showing you fake number based on fake formula built on a fake premise. And honestly, if that's the foundation of your entire trade policy, we've got much bigger problems. All right, folks, if you made it this far and you like videos that break down messy political stuff into plain English, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps me out tremendously and it tells me that you want more of this kind of content. Thank you so much for watching.